Hello, this is Nick Hodges, the Delphi Product Manager, and welcome to another edition of Turbo Delphi Demos. Today we're going to continue on with our TurboPad application, and we're going to see if we can't make it a little more functional today. If you recall yesterday, whenever it was that you last listened to the previous edition of TurboPad, if you recall, we had a main form here in the designer, had a little menu, and if we ran the application, it didn't do much other than pop up a nice little about box. And it would also have the file exit menu item there that allowed the file to close. Well, that was it. That's all we did. Well, today we're going to get a little more involved, and obviously we're trying to reproduce Notepad. So the first thing we need to do, of course, is we need to fill in this area here with something where people can type. So the control we're going to use is a Memo control off the standard palette. I'm just going to click there and click here and drop one on here. Now that's a Memo control, and in the Object Inspector you can see that it has a number of different properties. The one that's really key, of course, is the lines property, and that is the property, a collection of strings that contains the actual text inside the Memo. So if I click here, you'll notice it brings up the string list editor. And the string list editor allows me to enter in any text I want here, which will then end up in the memo. Well, actually, to start, we want to have it blank. So we'll just blank it out like so. And now we have a blank memo. The next thing we want to have happen is we want it to fill up this entire area, and we want it to stay filled up even if we size it. So for instance, my point is if I kind of go like this, and I drag it down and I go, aha, look, now it fills up the whole thing. Well, if you save and run, of course, it doesn't really fill up, because now if I size this, you'll notice that the memo doesn't change size. So instead what we want to do is we want to align it to the client area. Every Win control, most controls will have an alignment. Any sizable control should have an align property. Currently it's set to AL none. The alignment property allows you to set something to the bottom. It can lock onto the bottom. If I set it to align to the left, you'll notice now it's stuck on the left side. But what I want is the client area, and the client means whatever is the area that the largest area that the thing can be taken, that the object can take up given its container. And in this case, the container is the form. So when I select client, you'll notice now that the memo takes up the entire space with the exception of the menu. So now if I save and run, you'll notice that the application does run, and I can now actually type something into TurboPad. It doesn't do anything. Doesn't save it, doesn't allow you to change the fonts or anything, but it does accept the basics of text, basic text. And I can exit the file there. So now we have inside the IDE, or inside of our application in the IDE, a nice sort of TurboPad application with a memo there. So at this point, really all we have to do now is add functionality to the application. In other words, we have to make it start doing the things that Notepad is supposed to be able to do. And in fact, if we go Start, Run, Notepad, you'll note that Notepad doesn't have anything more to it than what we've got, other than just some menu items. But I notice it does have one thing that we need to add in, and that is scroll bars. The memo itself, the Memo component, has a scroll bars property, and we can select as its property SS both, and now you'll see it'll put a scroll bar in there. They're currently darkened or grayed out because they're not used, but if we were to, let's see, if we were to run the application, again, put some text in here, let's size this thing down a real lot, and I can just start typing some text. And you'll notice that as I add lines to the text, the scroll bars will start becoming active, and then if I were to add no more text, see as it becomes active as needed. But of course, if I size this out, you notice they become inactive. And that's all built right into the memo control itself. There's no need for you to do anything else beyond that. All that functionality is built right into the control itself. Okay, So next up, basically, to get things working to get our application working more like Notepad, we need to create the functionality of these menu items. We need to start adding menu items and increasing and providing functionality behind them. Now, there's sort of an old school way to do this, and it's sort of what we've done so far is that you can double click on the menu item and you can add menu items and then double click on the menu item themselves and go to the event handlers for those items and add code. But that's kind of old school and that's kind of inefficient. One of the things that you always want to do when you're building an application is you always want to separate out your code or abstract out your code from the interface as much as possible. And so we want to do that here in our application. And now, for instance, the reason we want to do that is right now we've got this code hard-coded right into the exit button or exit menu item for close, to call close. Now let's say later on, which we will do just because we will be able to fairly easily, but I'll show you how to do it. Say we wanted to add a toolbar that had an exit button on it. Well, then we have to double click on the toolbar and we have to add the very same code into another toolbar, into another event handler for the tool button. And we have two places that are doing exactly the same thing. They're exiting the application. They're calling the same code, but we'd have to do it twice. And if we were to somehow change that code, or we wanted to call some code or do something before we're actually going to close the application, we'd have to put that code in two different places. And it would be much better if we could centralize the concept of exiting the application into a single location, single place. And that is a functionality provided by the VCL for you in the form of action managers. Okay, so what we're going to do then is we're going to hunt up the, we need to have the designer active. We're going to hunt up the action list. I'm going to search here and search here and look for the action list. There's two types of action managers. One is the action manager, which actually contains some additional functionality above and beyond what we're going to look at in this application. But the action list is just very simply a collection of actions or events that you can abstract into a separate entity so that you can hook that action up to multiple user interface items such as toolbar buttons or menu items or other such buttons, other things inside the application that make it easier to sort of gather together the functionality that you're looking for and then distribute it more easily across various UI pieces. So for instance, if we double click on the action list, it brings up a simple group of categories and actions, and we can select between new action, which would be a single action that we would define, or some of the standard actions such as file menu opportunities, editing, help, window, some of the standard menu items that you kind of see normally in the in applications. And we're of course going to look to start with at the file options. I'm going to select T file open as the action. It's in the file category, and it is an action that represents opening a file. And you notice that each action has its own property. Already has a pre-made caption here, has a category. It actually creates an instance of the open dialog for you so that when you select this item and want to open a file, it'll pop open the open file dialog, and we'll be able to, via the object inspector here in a second, set the properties for that. It actually has a shortcut key associated with it, Control O, and a hint. It provides all that information for you built right into the VCL. Okay, so now what I can do is, now that I have this action, file open here, I can go to the menu item. I can double click here. I can select a new item. I can actually move this. I can create a new item, new menu item, and attach to this menu item the file open one action. And now I can take it and move it up so that it's above the exit, because usually the exit's at the bottom of the menu. And in fact, here's a little side tip. If you want to put a separator bar in between, say, the open and the exit down at the bottom here, you can put a dash in for the caption, hit enter, and then I'm sorry, that was not right. Look at what I did. I put it in the I need to put the dash in the caption property. No wonder it gave me an error. Once I do that, it gave me an error. Once I do that, then I have a separator. Now I can drag that separator up, and now you notice that the exit action is below the open action with the separator in between. But now you'll notice that I have this open item here, and I haven't had to write any code at all or set any properties manually. All I did was I added the action to the action I added the file open to the action property of this menu item, and now I have a proper caption with open. I have a Control O for the shortcut, and here's the really neat part, is that it actually, I still haven't written any code, and it actually, when I run the application, up it comes. If I go File Open, you'll notice that it'll even open up the dialog, an open file open dialog box for me. All automatically, just because of the power of the actions. Okay, so now I can bring up a file open dialog, but that dialog box wasn't real useful because it didn't really allow me to search for exactly what I'm looking for, which is text files. So what I can do now is bring up the file open action again, and come over here to its dialog property, and that is actually a reference to the open dialog that opens up. And I can change some of the properties to make it a little more useful for looking for text files. So for instance, I can search for say the default extension is txt. I can open up the filter property editor here and add some filters such as, say, text files, which would be referenced by star.txt. And I might also say I want to look for any files, which would be star.ini or ini. And then normally you almost always add all files, which is just star.star. And this is just a little filter editor that will add to the filters that I can use in my file open dialog box in order to search for text files. And I can also give the dialog box a title, such as open a text file for TurboPad. And I could set all those properties in the Object Inspector. So now, once I do this, I save and run. Now when I go File Open, you'll notice that by default it searches and filters on text files, and here is a trusty little lorem ipsum text. It doesn't do anything yet, but I can select a text file. So now, of course, at this point, we want the application to do something when I select a file. And there's an event for that called the onAccept event. The action, the file open action, has an event that occurs, that is fired, when the user presses the OK button or double clicks on a file inside of the file open box. It's called the onAccept event, and to get an event handler for it, I simply double click here, and it creates, as you can see, a file open one accept event. Now inside that event, I need to do a couple things. The first thing I need to do is I need to grab a hold of the file name that the open dialog box had, or the user had selected in the open dialog box. And I'm going to declare a variable here called temp file name, which is of type file name, which is actually an alias for string. And I'm going to go ahead and grab a hold of that string, and in this case I'm going to use the file open one, which is the action. I'm going to get its dialog property, and its dialog has a property on it called file name, which is the name of the file that I selected. Once I have that, I can then check to make sure that the file exists. I don't ever really want to deal or do anything with files that don't exist, so I can say if temp or if file exists, temp file name, then begin end. I can write some code now, and this file exists is simply a call into the sysutils method, and no surprise that it returns file exists. It returns true if the file exists. So if the file does exist, well, I want to open it up. And so I call Memo1, which is our memo box that we dropped on there at the very beginning. I go to the lines property, and the lines property has a very conveniently named function called load from file, and I'm going to pass to it temp file name. And once I've done that, Now I can run the application. And if I open this up, again, I've got this lorem ipsum text, which is just full of that sort of pseudo-Latin-y text that you always see out on the web. And once I select the open box, you should notice that there it is. The file has been opened up into the edit box. Now, you'll notice that it doesn't word wrap automatically, and we'll be dealing with that in the future, but it is opening the file, and you can actually edit it here. At this point, we can't save any of the edits. We'll work on that next. But there you have it. TurboPad at this point will actually now open up a file for you using actions. The thing to remember about actions are they are an abstraction of events and activities that take place, so that each individual event can be hooked up to multiple UI elements. And in fact, later on we'll be attaching that file open event action, strictly speaking, to a speed button, so you can actually have a little button there to just quickly click to open a file. So that'll do it for this edition of Delphi Turbo Demos. I'm Nick Hodges, the Delphi Product Manager. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you around next time.